All right, with our old friend Jay Skurski from the Buffalo. I mean, you're a young man. We go
Yeah,
back that way, old man.
yeah,
Old friend from the Buffalo News, Jay Skurski, joining us on the beat and in the basement, and certainly on the program. Good seeing you, man.
yeah. You too. Yeah, no, I'm getting old. That's fine. We all are. You can say that.
I don't have to say it about myself. It's visible.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Same here. The beard is a little trim right now, but there's plenty of gray in there when it starts to come in.
There's a lot to talk about the team that you cover on a daily basis. And obviously, a game in Houston that they lose by 3, but so many talking points out of it that have been, listen, kind of talked to death, let's be honest. But I think the one thing that cannot be over talked about is Josh's performance in that game. His worst performance as a pro, arguably, and the extension of that, obviously, is a receiver core that also has been talked to death all week long. And then, of course, there's the coordinator. But I mean, just for you, what's your ultimate takeaway from where the offense is right now, and ultimately what it needs to do to get on track? And is it a week away? Is it a month away? Like, in your gut, based on the people you've talked to and what you've seen, what do you think it's going to take to get this thing back going right again?
Well, I'd say it's probably 2 weeks away because this Jets team has not been easy for the Bills to deal with, even with better offensive weapons than what they have right now. So I think the New York defense has always challenged Josh Allen. That's been true even when Cole Beasley and Stephon Diggs and much more accomplished wide receivers than what the Bills have right now were here. So I think this is a tough matchup coming up. It better not be a month, though, right? It can't go on much longer, or else this team's going to be in real serious trouble. So, uh, what is going on? I think there's a couple of things. Number one, I think the book is sort of out right now on the way to defend the Bills. It's pressure Josh Allen like crazy, blitz him like crazy. The offensive line is not protecting well. The offensive line is also, though, being put into a really tough spot. I mean, if you only get 5 offensive linemen. If you rush more than that, it's going to be tough to block them, right? That's just reasonable. What has to happen to counteract that or to combat that is these wide receivers have to get open, and they're not. There is just no separation. And so even when Allen eludes the first rusher and maybe, and makes things happen, which we've seen so often, he's so good at, he's got nowhere to go with the football. And so it's a bad recipe right now because he's got nowhere to go with the football. And then on the few times against Houston that he did, he missed them, right? And he missed them badly. And that's on him. That's on Josh Allen. He deserves a lot of the blame for the result in that game. As you said, arguably his worst game as a professional. And so you need Josh Allen to be Superman every week. When he doesn't play like a superhero, you're going to get the results that you got. And so, yeah, I think if you're Joe Brady, the challenge right now is finding a way to combat that, finding a way to scheme guys open. If you can't do it with pure skill, then you got to scheme them. You got to scheme them open.
Yeah, I the one thing that bothered me, I think, most in the Houston game is really the lack of targets for James Cook. I feel like he's a weapon that can be used, and Knox as well, who has been virtually invisible. And Knox, I mean, let's face it, he was a very serviceable and still is tight end. But you got Kincaid, who you spent some obviously big draft capital on to get, and so he is going to be your focused tight end receiver. But he's been a guy that for a long time has sort of been, prior to Kincaid, Josh's sort of security blanket. He's made a lot of big plays for Josh Allen over the years, and he kind of has been taken out of the past game as well.
Yeah, I said during the game that the only thing on offense right now that doesn't look difficult is James Cook, right? And whether that's running the ball or, and to your point, throwing it to him as well. He's been, I'd say, maybe their best offensive player. I mean, clearly Allen's up there, but Allen has not played particularly well, certainly against Houston and the game against Baltimore. That one kind of got away from him for a number of different reasons. But the point there is that Cook has been really, really consistent. I think really good this year. You want to give him the ball. You want to give him the ball in the run game, but you also want to involve him in the pass game. Agree 100% there. Knox is a confusing one. There's a lot of confusing ones on this offense, though, right? Kincaid is a confusing one. Why is he not doing more? Not even a game with 50 yards receiving yet for Dalton Kincaid. Nobody saw that coming into the year. I mean, people were expecting big, big things from Dalton Kincaid. Curtis Samuel, right? Where has he been? Just invisible. I mean, invisible, it might be too kind of a word for what they've gotten from Curtis Samuel. So I think that you have to figure out a way. Okay, well, are we going to totally reinvent what we're doing offensively? I think it's a little late in the game to be doing that. But yeah, using these guys, whether it's Knox or Kincaid or Samuel did not practice today, so we'll see what goes on there. But yeah, with Knox especially, he had a big group of media around him today. It's a talking point. It's easy to gloss over these things, to look past them when you're winning. And at 3-0, everybody eats, everybody's having a great time. It's all well and good. The storyline's a lot different when you've lost 2 games in a row and you've lost it because your offense can't score. And so then you start to dig into those numbers a little bit more, saying, what's going on here? And that's true for Knox, Kincaid, Samuel. Really, you go down the list, other than James Cook, who has contributed the way that you would expect them to. Maybe Khalil Shakir, obviously missing in a game, hurts his overall numbers, but it's really been probably Cook and Shakir. That's about it.
Yeah, and it's troubling too that Josh, the elite quarterbacks in the history of the league, especially the ones that have racked up gigantic statistics, are guys that can hit deep balls consistently, especially when guys are open. And for whatever reason, Josh, I mean, this goes back to maybe 2 years ago, even when he's had trouble hitting guys that have been arguably wide open. And no one seems to, and I don't even know. I mean, you're around it way more than I am, and you're much closer to it than I am. What seems, has he been asked about that? Is that what seems to be the reasoning behind his inaccuracy in terms of the deep ball?
Well, there's a couple of things at play here. I mean, number one, Allen has worked on his deep ball accuracy. That's been an offseason focus for him. Not saying necessarily this past offseason, but in off seasons past, he has identified that as an area of his game that was a weakness that he wanted to improve. I don't know, because you look at the playoffs last year against Kansas City, he puts it in Diggs' hands, 70 yards through the air. You go back to a couple years ago against the Jets, actually, even farther through the air to Gabe Davis. It's a perfect throw. So the receiver isn't making the play at times. And then there are other times, like on Sunday, you've got, Mac Hollins running open deep in the first quarter, Dalton Kincaid in the second quarter, and the throws aren't good enough. Now, with Hollins, I think there was maybe some blame on the player too. There was a miscommunication. The ball went toward the sideline. The receiver was going to the middle. It's wide open. So I think there's a lot there, right? You're working in relatively new receivers that Allen still does not have the type of chemistry that he had with Cole Beasley, with Stephon Diggs, with Gabe Davis, even with John Brown, guys that had been here for a long time. He's throwing to an entirely new cast. Now, that doesn't excuse overthrows. It doesn't excuse underthrows. And it's not to make excuses for Allen, but it is reality. So I think that, not to sneak out of giving you a clean answer here, but it seems like almost on every one of these passes, there's a different thing that's going on, right? And so there's a lot of different reasons that those connections aren't being made. Some on Josh, some on the receivers.
Yeah. By the way, you don't need to have an excuse from me. They do, because they're the ones that are making the mistakes here and are causing themselves football games. But it's just, and then Josh, I mean, it is mind blowing to me that Josh Allen was not concussed. I just seeing that head blow to the ground and coming off and then pointing to his chest. And when you saw the replay, and I'm sure you did from the press box in Houston, they showed a pretty good close up of his face and he almost looked knocked out. I just am blown away. And I'm assuming, and I know I'm being sort of a conspiracy theorist here, but man, do the stars in big games get exceptions in these places? I know they're not supposed to, and no one will ever admit to it, but my gosh, I just, it is mind blowing to me that guy was not concussed on that play and that he came back as quickly as he did.
Yeah, I mean, all I can say about that is that the independent spotter from who sits above the field, up in the press box where we are, or somewhere up there, is the one that called down to say that Allen needed to have the independent neurologist give him the concussion test. That did take place in the blue sideline medical tent. I don't know exactly. I would say this from past experience in covering these games, seeing similar situations where you learn that a player is being evaluated for a head injury. Sometimes they can be cleared fairly quickly. You actually only have to go back to the game the week before. Connor McGovern, the Bills center, went into and it was called down from above, and he was back in the game a short time later. So you know, I don't know how long the process took. You also have to remember, too, that the Bills, he was injured on a third down play, so then they punted. And so then Houston had a series. So there was some time there
Yep.
where he was, he was in the medical tent for a good few minutes. And then before I didn't even actually see him emerge because Trubisky comes out,
Yep.
there's the turnover, the Bills get the ball back, and we're all looking to see, okay, who's in there? It's Trubisky. And then Allen at that time was, came out. And I would say this about the NFL. They are not going to, especially after everything that has happened with Tua, they are not going to let anyone skirt the concussion protocol procedures. That just isn't going to happen. It would be an absolutely horrific look for the league if that came out, if they found that out. And the other thing I would say about that is that Allen practiced today fully. There was no indication that anything was amiss in terms of that. And if he had really suffered a concussion on Sunday, and sometimes, listen, with concussions, guys can report symptoms on Monday, the day after the game. That has happened too. There's been nothing of that sort with Josh either.
Well, he's got a harder head than I guess I thought, and maybe a lot of other people too. There were a lot of positives, believe it or not, in that game. I thought Dorian Williams was fantastic, and it kind of helps when you got Terrell Bernard playing next to you. So he doesn't have to, he sort of has that security blanket next to him. I thought he was great. I thought Dwayne Carter played very, very well. I thought Smoot was excellent. I mean, there were some good players in that game, and now they seemingly are getting better on defense. With it looks like Taron Johnson being pretty close to being ready, if not ready, for the Jets, and Rapp looks like he's going to be coming back. Cole Bishop, of course, on the deep Nico Collins play was exposed, and maybe Rapp comes back in, and that would help as well. So they're going to get better on defense. They need Ed Oliver to return, obviously, and certainly they need a little bit more of a pass rush, in my opinion. You're not seeing, and I said this going into the season about Greg Rousseau. I mean, I love what he's done in terms of his body type and building his body into what he should be. But man, that guy is one of the most inconsistent players I've ever seen in terms of getting pure numbers of what I thought we were supposed to see from him based on where he was drafted. What are your thoughts on Rousseau?
Well, yeah, he had an interesting game. Obviously, you go back to the opener, and he's got the 3 sacks against Arizona, and I think that set the bar quite high for his season. I think this was one where the stat sheet lied a little bit. I thought he was getting pressure, and if you look at some of the analytics websites, they would agree with that. I think Pro Football Focus had him actually for 6 pressures. Part there again, nuanced here, right? C.J. Stroud, very good quarterback. Thought he did a really nice job getting the ball out right before the pressure got there. We know that Stroud, he's not a huge runner, but he can make some plays with his legs. He scrambled away from pressure at times. So I think Rousseau had a better game. I think he was more impactful, more visible against Houston than he was probably the previous 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Your point, though, especially with Von Miller out, they need that closer, right? They need that guy who is going to get the quarterback to the ground. It's got to be Rousseau. You picked up that option. You're counting on him to be the guy up front, right? And especially that's true with Von Miller and Ed Oliver out. 2 guys that have already been paid big money. Rousseau is kind of the star at that point along the defensive line. And so do you need more from him? I think it's fair, but I wouldn't say that he had an awful game or anything even close to that. And then, to your point about, the other positives, I think largely defensively, this is a game you'd take. Yeah. I mean, if you went into it and said, we're going to hold the Texans to 23 points, you'd feel pretty good about the offense getting to 24.
Yep.
And I'd say that's true in almost every week, right? I think the offense and the coaching is why the Bills lost this game. It's certainly not the defense. Bernard coming back was big. You mentioned it. Smoot. I mean, the big thing they did was those takeaways in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
I mean, that is absolutely massive. The defense gave this team a chance to win that football game.
Yeah, I was going to say, but the problem was they scored 3 points off of the 2 takeaways and the grounding penalty by Stroud. And I mean, that's a problem, right? I mean, to back up what you said, that was on the offense. The defense silver plattered them, and they couldn't deliver in the fourth quarter problematically. That's fast forward to the Jets. Obviously, doing what you do as a beat writer for the news of the Bills, you're in contact with writers from all the other football cities, I'm assuming, on a fairly regular basis. So with Saleh being let go this week, I mean, what are you hearing from your peers in New York about that? What's going on in the room in New York with the Jets and Aaron Rodgers and all of it going into this game?
Well, I mean, I think, I think that Aaron Rodgers fired Robert Saleh? No, I don't. I mean, but do I think that if Aaron Rodgers didn't want Robert Saleh to get fired, he could have prevented it? Absolutely, I think that. And so I think that Rodgers throwing his hands up on Pat McAfee today and saying that he resents the insinuation that he had anything to do with Saleh getting fired. Okay, I mean, sure, but did you go to bat for the guy? Did you try to keep his job? That's the part that's sort of left unsaid. I mean, if there's one thing that you can take away from this whole situation with the Jets, it's that whatever they do, it's going to be wrong, right? That's just the type of franchise they are, right? And so trading for Aaron Rodgers, that's going to be wrong, right? He's 40 years old and he's a notorious locker room cancer. And yeah, of course, he's incredibly talented and he'll be in the Hall of Fame one day, but the guy destroys locker rooms. And he's doing what he did at the end of his tenure in Green Bay, right? And the difference is his play isn't backing it up on the field. He's not good enough to put up with the headaches anymore, right? And so I think that if you are the Jets and you're looking at it and saying, this guy is, playing politics in this room with the coaching staff, and for what? What are we giving this guy free rein for? He can't even play. He's got 3 interceptions the last game, and 2 of them are horrific, And so that being said, though, when you talk about just solely this game, I don't know. It's even harder to handicap in my mind because of the new coach angle. I mean, do these guys show up and play inspired football? Do they completely just check out? I think it's too early in the year to be checked out. I mean, you're 2-3. If you win, you're tied for the division lead, right? So I have a hard time believing that this Jets team is going to sleepwalk through this game or not be prepared, not be inspired. And particularly defensively, like those guys probably love playing for Saleh. He made a lot of those guys a lot of money. And so I would think that the Bills are going to get the Jets' best shot in this game.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I'm nervous if they figure out a way to get Breece Hall on track. I mean, he is probably, in my opinion, if there were 5 mysteries in the NFL this year, he's up in one of those 5 numbers of mysteries. Like with that guy's talent level to be having the lack of production that he's had, whether that's play calling, whether that's him, whether it's, who knows what it is, but man, to have that guy not produce is regrettable in terms of the Jets offense. And you'll hear me. I'm going to mention this more in detail a little bit later, but I think weirdly that Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers are sort of in a similar situation. And this is how they're working with 2 offensive coordinators that really haven't had big long-term successes in the league, right? Neither one of them, whether it's Brady or Hackett. He's working with a receiver core outside of Garrett Wilson for the Jets and maybe Kincaid and / Shakir for the Bills, sort of a middle of the road receiver core, right? Not really spectacular, just kind of average, right? And then you're talking about teams with 2 defensive head coaches, right? So I think oddly, the 2 quarterbacks are kind of dealing with the same thing, but maybe on a slightly different level.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly can see that. You make a lot of good points about, the similarities there between, the coordinators maybe being under fire right now, right? I mean, what's the story out of New York is that Salo had plans to fire Hackett or maybe demote Hackett before himself getting fired, right? And so, and I think Joe Brady similarly, not that anybody was suggesting that he'd get fired, but I think there was a lot of fair questions asked of Joe Brady about just what the heck he was trying to accomplish there against Houston, particularly at the end of the game with those 3 passes. So, yeah, and then you look at the weapons, right? I think, skill position wise, you're probably picking the Jets over the Bills, right? With Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. The Bills don't have certainly a player on Garrett Wilson's level. And, as I said, James Cook, I think, has been a very good player. But again, he missed practice today as well. So we got to see the availability there with James Cook. But this Jets passing offense, in some ways, it's Garrett Wilson or nothing. He was targeted 22 times against the Vikings. 22. That is an insane number. I can't remember. I'd love to know if there's ever been a Bills receiver that's been 22, gotten 22 targets in a game. I can't remember it happening anytime recently. So, for the Bills, I think, the key here is, we saw the problems that Derrick Henry presented, right? And I'm not saying Breece Hall is Derrick Henry. He's not. But this Bills defense is always going to thrive about stopping the run first. And I think when you look at the lack of mobility that Rodgers has at 40 coming off of an Achilles injury, I think you got 2 really good cornerbacks here in Buffalo, right? Douglas and Benford, I think, are playing great football.
Yep.
Not that that they're going to win the matchup against Garrett Wilson every time, but I think you go into it and say, all right, hey, we're going to take our chances here. We got to shut the run down, and then we've got to get after Rodgers. To your earlier point about Rousseau and that pass rush, make him uncomfortable in the pocket, hit him.
Yeah, for sure. I just can't. I don't think anybody has a good grasp on this game. I mean, most of the people I'm talking to are like you, and you'll find out later from me that I think the Jets are going to win as well. But I don't know if it's going to be a lopsided victory for either one of the two teams. Is it going to be a 2-point, 3-point victory for either one of the two teams? Nothing speaks to me about how this game is going to end. How about you?
I feel like, and I'm going to steal this line from my colleague Mercon. We were talking about it at practice today. This feels like a game that's a race to 20 points. And, I think the Bills defense should be able to make some plays. You mentioned earlier Taron Johnson coming back. We'll see about Oliver. He didn't practice today. That would be big if they were able to get him back. But their really good sign was that Bernard was able to play every snap last week. That's big. So I think defensively the Bills should feel like, all right, we're going to go into this with what we feel is a pretty good game plan. But as I mentioned earlier when we first started talking, this is a Jets defense that has given Josh Allen trouble really throughout his career. I don't see that changing right now because your second best player, James Cook, is dealing with an injury. And we know, don't we know about the receiving core, right? And the struggles that it's had. So it's hard to predict, it's hard to project the Bills going in there and scoring 30 points in this game. I just don't see it. So I see an ugly, kind of close defensive game, and in a race to 20 points sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah. And you said it earlier too, and you're right that, look, the Ravens and the Texans, they basically wrote the book on how to defend Josh Allen. It's basically pressure. Don't let him get if he gets out of the pocket, make sure there's somebody in front of him so he doesn't have the opportunity to run, but make sure he's flustered, make sure he's uncomfortable. Those two teams did it incredibly well. And the Jets have an incredibly athletic defense. So yeah, why wouldn't they do that and frustrate the Bills? So I'm with you. I think it's going to be low scoring as well. Anything else you want to tell us, Jay Skurski, about you and the prodigy young golfer in your particular family and all of that good stuff?
Yeah, we're the trip to New York. I told him today. I surprised him a little bit. We are going to go down on Sunday. Obviously, the game is on Monday. He's going to fly down with me, and we've got a tee time set up at Bethpage Black, which
awesome.
Is exciting. Yeah, site of the Ryder Cup next year, and we can take wagers now. I'm sure he'll beat me at Bethpage, but he's pretty excited about that. I'm pretty excited about it. I've played it once before, similar. on a Bills trip. Went down, the day before the game and was able to get out there. And it is an awesome course, and it's for state residents. It's a great deal. If I'm sure people know, but it's a public course, and so if you can get a tee time, it's totally worth it. So very much looking forward to this trip, mostly for that.
So, for those of you that don't know, Jay's son, Elliot, is a highly ranked. What's his age group at this point?
Yeah, he's 10 years old. He's in fifth grade. Yeah,
and probably in the top 25 in the country
yeah,
ish.
yeah. In the world, he's top 30 probably in the world. Maybe even a little bit higher in the country. Not to not to inflate his ego, but yeah, he's a darn good little player, and he loves it. He's working hard at it, and we'll see where it takes him. But yeah, he's doing well.
Man, I just hope that in 5 to 7, let's say 8, 9 years, Jim Nance is still around calling golf, so he can tell Elliot's story, and you're going to be on Elliot's bag, and
Yeah.
and you guys are going to be the darlings of the golf world. It's going to be awesome.
I share that hope. I appreciate you saying that, but that would certainly be the dream for sure.